Hello folks, my name is Maya and welcome to my channel. I'd like to do a little video using widely accepted science as the backbone to this presentation. The aim of it is to rekindle the connection between what we are and where we come from. So, without further ado, welcome to the evolution of us. Around 13 billion years ago, the potential for life as we know it was scattered across a chasm of darkness, yet to become the fertile cosmos we know today. This became known as the radiation era. During this time, heat governed and energy ruled. A definition of energy is a force which cannot be created or destroyed, only converted. Similar to if you were to go and ask a religious person what is at the crux of creation, they would say God. And you'd say, well, what is your definition of God? And God too is one eternal being who cannot be created or destroyed. You cannot see it, you cannot touch it, yet without it, there is nothing. So during the radiation era, this energy formed the one superforce. That one superforce then broke off into four separate forces that became gravitational, electromagnetism, strong nuclear and weak nuclear. I would go on to simplify this further and say that fundamentally we have two forces at play here, a push-pull factor. The guy sitting under the tree is Isaac Newton, and legend has it that he discovered gravity when pondering an apple falling. Well, one thing we do know that he said is that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and that's exactly what happens. At the beginning, when the universe was expanding, it was very hot. It then began to cool down. This allowed for quarks to become attracted together. They bound to form protons and neutrons. Protons and neutrons form a nucleus, and the nucleus forms atoms, and then the atoms form elements, and this takes us out of the radiation era and into the matter era, and it also covers the time we're currently in. A definition of matter is anything which takes up space and has mass, and the fundamental unit of matter is measured by an atom, and atoms are what make up the periodic table. The first element on our periodic table was helium, derived from the Greek word helios, meaning sun, depicted as He on the periodic table. He is literally the lightest of all elements, and thus roamed the universe freely and alone. But he was too light to settle. So the universe bore he a partner. Enter hydrogen, derived from the Greek word hydro, meaning water, and gene, meaning creator. Hydrogen and helium coupled together, and they formed our first stars. Some of these stars went on to form suns, and some of those suns became solar systems, one of which includes ours. Genesis recalls that when God began creating, the earth was a shapeless, chaotic mass, and that's most likely what it was. In the cold vacuum of space, the attractive force of gravity pulled matter in to form a hot, rocky ball. This scorching droplet in a newborn Milky Way would become our Earth. It formed a core, a mantle and a crust, similar to that of a yolk, a white and a shell. So at the time when the rest of the periodic table was beginning to fill out, Earth in utero was spewing lava at her crust. And lava is comprised of silicon and oxygen. Now, oxygen we need in the human body. Silicon is what's responsible for creating our bones and our connective tissues. And this lava would then bind with other elements such as magnesium and iron. Magnesium is needed in the body for hundreds of processes, and iron is needed to deliver oxygen in the blood. So these elements such as oxygen and silicon would combine with other elements such as magnesium and iron, and this lava would then cool to form basalt. Basalt is an aggregate. It's used in construction projects. It's what makes our tiles and our pavements. It's tarmac. And then under immense heat and pressure, this basalt turned into granite, and this granite would go on to form Earth's continents. The flow of heavier elements also began to conduct and radiate electricity, which created a magnetic field. Human beings also have a magnetic field. It comes from our heart and spans about 8 feet in diameter. So this magnetic field acted as a shield and cooled the planet from the sun's radiation, which allowed for water to evaporate and then condense, and these will go on to form the oceans, which create our blue planet. So water is really magnificent. An experiment conducted by Harold Urey and Stanley Miller in the 1950s, which actually won them a Nobel Prize, proved water's magnificence. What they did was discover that Earth's primitive oceans were being struck by lightning, And this lightning was breaking up inorganic compounds which were in the waters at the time. Inorganic means inanimate, and a compound is two elements combined, so an inorganic compound. These inorganic compounds were in the waters, and the lightning was striking the water to break them down. These molecules then coupled together again, and they formed organic compounds. Organic means life, and a definition of life is that which can sustain itself and has the ability to reproduce. This came in the form of amino acids, which stuck together to form proteins, and proteins are the building blocks for RNA, DNA, and muscle tissue. Now, just as the radiation era began with the one superforce, it's likely but not proven that life began on Earth through one thread of information, which was RNA. This one thread of information then became two threads of information to form the double helix. And we know it's the double helix because Rosalind Franklin discovered this in the 1950s. What she did was take DNA, she crystallized it, she exposed it to X-rays to produce an image on film, and that shows us the double helix. Unfortunately, due to her work with radiation, she died of cancer and thus never received the recognition or notoriety she deserves, because if you're dead, you can't receive a Nobel Prize. Scientists still don't know what the first life on Earth was. It's called our last universal common ancestor, or LUCA for short. And this last universal common ancestor gave rise to two domains of life. They're both microbial. Those are the archaea and the bacteria. Archaea we don't really hear much about. They're extremophiles, which means they like extreme conditions, so particularly hot or salty environments, for example. And bacteria we're familiar with. Now, the archaea don't photosynthesize, whereas the bacteria do. So the bacteria began digesting CO2 and then produced sugar, and a waste product of that was oxygen, which then created our atmosphere. The oldest microbes are around 3.5 billion years old. Microbial life has shaped and managed Earth's habitat for billions of years now. They control the content of our soil and our water and our atmosphere and even our human body. And so then what happened was, via a process known as endosymbiosis. Endo means within, and symbiosis is a relationship that benefits both parties. So what happened is the bacteria became engulfed, and then they turned into mitochondria. And the mitochondria we inherit from our mother's lineage, and it supplies a cell with energy. This gave rise to more complex forms of life, which are called eukaryotes. Eukaryotes give rise to the kingdom of plant, the kingdom of fungi, the kingdom of animals. 500 million years ago, algae made the transition from nutrient-rich waters to the terrestrial land, and this is where they became the likes of mosses, which cushioned the lava fields, and other simple plants which clung to riverbanks. Then the fungi made the transition across. Now, fungi are amphibious in the sense that they can survive in an aquatic environment and also a terrestrial one. When we hear fungi, we're often familiar with a mushroom. This is actually the flowering part of the fungi. The fungi like the dark, damp conditions, so they actually live underground, where they mine rock and extract a meal of minerals. Endosymbiosis then occurs again between the fungi and the plants. So the fungi then penetrate the plant deep into the cell, where they exchange minerals that they've mined for sugars the plants have created. And this gives rise to more complex, bigger plants for the likes of ferns and trees, which would then become forests. Meanwhile, back in the oceans, eukaryotic life develops through the animal kingdom as invertebrates. Invertebrate means it has no spine, so next time you hear spineless as an insult, pay some homage to your crustaceous ancestors. And these invertebrate beings would wear an exoskeleton of armour to protect themselves. And this armour is made up of calcium. Calcium, of course, is also on the periodic table. It's what the pyramids of Giza were made out of. Another word for it is limestone. Calcium, of course, is also present in the human body. It's what makes up our bones. This exoskeleton would then become an actual skeleton, which would form the likes of bones, skulls, teeth, fins, which would become hands. But before we go into hands, let's make the transition to land. It's likely but not proven that the ocean's invertebrates became the insects which filled the forests. From the invertebrates, we have the vertebrates, which give rise to the likes of fish. Fish then became amphibians, and the amphibians made the transition to land to become reptiles. But the mammals at the time were pretty much just scurrying around in the undergrowth, eating the insects and keeping out of the way of the dominant land species, which was the dinosaurs. The only thing keeping the dinosaurs at bay were other dinosaurs and fungal disease. Then the meteorite hit and killed 70% of life on Earth. Fast forward, we come to the present day. So I hope I've managed to encapsulate an overview and an understanding of what we are and where we come from on the tree of life as eukaryotes, branching off from the domains of archaea and bacteria. Prior to that, we had the last universal common ancestor, which is still a mystery. And predating that, we have our elementary ancestors, which form the periodic table. Prior to the periodic table, the universe was just filled with energy. So if you've watched all the way till the end, thank you, and see you in the next video. CO2